Silence is safer. Speaking up comes at a cost. This is the Audacity Tapes, where women have chosen courage across cultures, continents, and systems of power. I'm Robin Jorgensen. Welcome to the conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Audacity Tapes. Today, I have two incredible guests, Pari and Eve. They are healthcare professionals, reproductive rights advocates, and two of the most recognizable voices in this conversation online. Through their educational content, advocacy, and social media platforms, they've informed, empowered, and supported countless women across the United States in an increasingly complex reproductive healthcare landscape. Pari, Eve, welcome to the Audacity Tapes.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yes. All right, so let's start with the big picture. When Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, I can't believe it's already been 4 years, so many people assumed that the impact would be limited to abortion access. Mm-hmm. From your perspectives, what have people gotten wrong about what actually changed?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that a lot of the general public did not see coming down the road was how it would affect access to maternal care and just larger networks of obstetricians and gynecologists in general. So when federal protections for abortions were overturned, that meant that the right to an abortion was then determined on a state-by-state basis. And so each state, some of them had trigger laws in place already so that as soon as Roe was overturned, they had a ban in place that would go right into effect. And so that happened immediately for some states. And what happens over the course of time when an abortion ban goes into effect at the state level is that it becomes harder and harder for providers to practice medicine. Because when you become an OBGYN, some decide I'm only going to provide abortions, but some work at hospitals, they work in maternity wards, they work in different parts of the health sector. And they don't know when they're going to get a patient who comes in and needs that type of support.
Right.
And so they have to make split-second decisions around whether or not to provide an abortion based on what they know and trust they know about a state healthcare legal structure. And it can be really scary for providers. So a lot of providers have just left those states. And those states now have no maternal health care. 1 in 3 counties in the U.S. have no maternal health care.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we're just going to start off spitting facts.
Yeah,
I don't think people realize the impact of maternal health access dissipating with abortion rights being lost.
Yeah. Pari, anything you want to add to that?
For better or for worse, the consequence of being technical experts in this area is that even I saw all of it coming. And for years, I think people called us crazy women or hysterical women because we were saying that, hey, when they do something like this, when they get rid of a federal right to access an abortion, they're not just coming for abortion access. They're coming for emergency treatment, meaning the care that you get when you enter an emergency room. They're coming for contraception. They're coming for IVF. They are coming for women's autonomy as a holistic concept, meaning pregnancy protections in the workplace, our ability to own credit cards, our ability to vote. And people are often like, what are you talking about? They're like, what does abortion have to do with the Voting Rights Act? And the answer, unfortunately, is everything. Yep. Because no country on this planet that is banning abortion or restricting access to abortion is also ultimately viewing people with uteruses as equal people, right? So it is an indication of where we are as a country that our both federal and also state governments are doing this. And in the 4 years, you said at the beginning that it was 4 years. In the 4 years since Roe has fallen, the U.S., both at the federal level and multiple states, have enacted decades worth of anti-woman policy, right? Yep. We are only 6 months and the start of 6 months into 2026. And yet in 2026 alone, there have been 360 different anti-woman policies that have been passed as bills in this country. And if you think about the fact that it's only red states doing it, the proportion of people who are really trying to criminalize women just for existing is crazy, right? But this is the ecosystem that Eve and I try to describe all the time, is that one thing is indicative of 1,800 other things as
Right.
opposed to just being mutually exclusive.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest misconceptions? And you touched on a couple of these, but what do you hear from people who think, well, these laws won't affect me?
Okay, so the biggest one that we see very often, and I would love to take this opportunity to correct the record on this,
Please.
is that abortion bans do not affect women who have miscarriages. And as a public health professional, as someone who has worked on electronic medical records before, let me say for everybody listening, there is no medical difference between an abortion and a miscarriage. They are actually recorded the same way in your medical records. They are recorded using the same code for insurance purposes. There is both no scientific and no practical difference between that, which is why once Roe fell, we saw the criminalization of women who experience miscarriages in several states across the country. And that is simply a fact. It has happened. Women have been arrested for having miscarriages. Our comment sections seem to suggest that people have a hard time believing that, but there are a multitude of cases in which the police have shown up at women's doors after they sought care because they had an at-home miscarriage, right? So that is number one, because a miscarriage is spontaneous. There is nothing, like, it is nobody's fault. It
Right.
often happens outside of your control, and oftentimes most people are not actually able to access emergency medical care in those moments. And now the road to criminalizing those people, the road to punishing those people is actually not just existing, but has now been traveled upon by several Republican states, right? That's number one. The second misunderstanding that I think people have is that they're saying, like, oh, this ban is only for certain circumstances and certain consequences. If I showed up in an emergency room, I would still be offered care because during the Biden administration, there used to be a law called EMTALA that would protect that. That is no longer the case. There are several states that have challenged that. So now we have seen nationwide cases of women showing up in emergency rooms and doctors literally watch them deteriorate for 16 hours and then ultimately die because they are not allowed to perform the life-saving treatment that they need, and it happens to be an abortion, right? I would say those are the two biggest misconceptions that we see. But Eve, chime in with any more because there's plenty.
Yeah, I would just add to that. There's a misconception that abortion is not going to be banned nationally because the whole argument was send it back to the states. It's the
Right.
state rights, it's the state's decisions. But we see attempts over and over again, and most recently with a case out of Louisiana where a provider sent mail order abortion pills to a patient in Louisiana, which is a state that has essentially a total ban. And Louisiana got really upset and was like, you found a loophole in our abortion ban. How dare you? And so this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court for consideration, which had the Supreme Court ruled on it, it would have banned access to mifepristone, which is part of a medication abortion, across all 50 states. And it would have disallowed people from getting them mifepristone prescribed by telehealth, and it would have banned the mailing of it. And that is a problem because the majority of women in the United States access abortion through medication abortion. It's the most common type of abortion that exists in the US. And that is not essentially a national ban. I mean, that is a national ban on the most common abortion that women have.
Right.
That's a
Yeah.
federal ban.
And this is what is so fundamentally different with Trump's second term versus his first
Mm-hmm.
in so many ways.
Yeah, I think people also are, you know, when you can't always see the forest from the trees because like you're too vested in your daily life, which I get. Most Americans are concerned with like being able to put dinner on the table and being able to like think about, the betterment of their families and their own livelihoods, and we don't fault them for that. But what we are trying to say is that unless we decide to all come together and collectively fight back against this, it's going to continue to get worse. As we've seen in the last 4 years, they're taking sort of every opportunity to attack it, right? Because even what Eve was sharing about medication abortion, The logic behind them doing that is that they're labeling abortion pills as lewd objects because they're literally hearkening back to a law from the 1800s called the Comstock Act. And it's just ironic because, I mean, I'm just going to say this.
That's
People
insane.
People will
It is.
literally order, like, sex toys off of Amazon, and, like, Viagra is sold nationwide by
Right.
mail, 24-hour mail, and yet abortion pills, mifepristone, FDA approved for over 25 years, safer than Tylenol, that's the one they're going after. So you know if you have critical thinking skills that it's not actually about anything that they're claiming that it is. It's truly just a war against women.
Yeah, that's one piece of a much broader backlash against women's equality in general.
Mhm.
Yeah. What do you think this moment is teaching an entire generation of young women about power?
I think we're at a very interesting hinge point where, like, Pari and I lived through the Women's March that was just in 2016, which is crazy. What, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that is not currently part of like the larger generation that's experiencing the rollback of rights. Like they might have been there, but they were very young. And so I think I mean, the way I interpret it, I'm interested in Pari's opinion on this, is that it's teaching women that you have to go up and take the power. You have to go up and take the control,
Mm,
and you have to take up space, and you have to say, I am in this room. I deserve a seat at the table. I want to be everywhere that decisions are being made. And I don't mean that in like a hyperbolic way. I mean, like you actually have to do that because women are being shut out of tables and rooms every day
right.
so that these discriminatory rules and laws can be passed or overturned. So, I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm like the eternal optimist in my circle of friends, but I feel like it's telling women, young and old now, like, if you're older generations, you cannot stop fighting. We still need you. And if you're younger, you would need to step up to the plate and get in this fight because we have not seen a turnout like the Women's March in one single space since then. 10 years ago, we have across the country and the globe with some of the No Kings protests,
Yep.
but not a single space like the Women's March. And to me, that is quite discouraging, but I feel like there's still opportunity. It gives us more opportunity to do that again.
Yeah.
You
Pari?
know, what's funny? The US is coming up on the 25th anniversary of the country existing, right? And I think that if you look at it, if you look at it through history, women have been fighting the entire time
The whole
to,
250 years. Yeah.
yes, the entire time. And if you had asked me this question maybe a year and a half ago, I would have perhaps had a different response. But I will say that even as, you know, as advocates, as creators, as communicators, even I have started to see a change in the ethos and the culture in the last 6 months.
In
And
what
what I
way?
mean by this is in the beginning, it was a lot of despair and just, like confusion with hurt, with anger, with despair about the fact that people would rather choose a white man than allow the most qualified woman to become a president, right? So that was the initial feeling. But I think this administration really miscalculated how they are coming across to women. And what I mean by that is their intention has always been to control women. They actually haven't been silent about that. They were very loud and
We're
proud
quite
about it.
vocal. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. But ironically, despite the fact that they've passed 360 anti-woman bills this year alone, they have lost the culture of women in America. And of course, I'm not speaking for everybody. There are still the Republican women, the MAGA women, the women who uphold the patriarchy because patriarchy requires women to do that. But in general, I feel like the majority of women are stepping up to the plate in a bigger way than ever before. Whether that's through their own like personal identification of what it is that their lives are missing, or whether it's through a very loud and out approach, like Eve and I, where we're like putting our bodies on the line and at the forefront of a fight. I very much think that women are around the country and frankly around the world are stepping up and just saying enough. Enough of this, enough of men, enough of control, and all of that is there. My heart actually goes out more towards the older women. Like when Eve and I are at protests or we're at events or even in our comments, we have people come up to us or DM us that have been fighting this fight since they were young and they are now in their 80s and 90s. And I'm like, it is truly bullshit that we have failed you so much that you are not only still fighting the fight, but you're actually advocating again for things that you already fought for and
Right.
previously won. So I actually feel more just as a person for them because that must be like, like a level of disenfranchisement that is just like so angering that you and your friends put your blood and your bodies on the line to fight for Roe, to fight for better than Roe. And now you are actually watching your daughters and granddaughters have less rights than you. That is rough. But the daughters and the granddaughters are like, it's okay. We've got this, and
Right.
we're ready. So I actually feel pretty good about the way that women are moving as a collective for each other.
Love that. Can you walk us through some examples or situations where laws and medical realities collide? You touched on this a little bit, but do you hear from women where those two really meet?
Well, the first example I thought of as soon as you asked that question is the case that I think the entire country heard about in Georgia, where a Black woman, showed up to the ER when she was 8 weeks pregnant and she had severe migraines and they told her to go home. And within 12 hours, she was back at the hospital because she said that this is not normal and she passed. And instead of letting her pass with dignity and accepting their fault in the process, the state of Georgia turned her body into an incubator and put her on life supports. They put her on life support because they believed that the 8-week-old fetus deserved to be seen to completion, even though the actual existing human woman with a name and a story in life
Was
had already
technically
passed.
dead.
Yes. And I have to admit that not even I could have predicted that we were going to be that depraved this quickly. You know, I mean, like people often in our comments will be like, oh, it's the Handmaid's Tale coming to real life, because that is, in fact, a section of that book. But when that happened, I was frankly shook. When that happened, I was truly shook because, you know, it took me, I think I naively thought that maybe we'd have to wait 10 years before we were turned into incubators as opposed to just 4.
Right.
And not even 4, actually. That happened last year. So like 3, truly.
Right.
But it was such a, in my mind, poignant example of your question saying, like, when do laws and medical reality like clash or meet, right? Because they're out here pretending like an 8-week-old fetus is this independent, fully cognizant human being person. And that is just not true, as evidenced by the fact that you had to turn a dead person's body into an incubator for 7 additional months, right? And for folks who were following that story, the media has stopped talking about it. But the child that was eventually born after that incubation is still, to this day, meaning for 1.5 years in the hospital. That child is still not living a fully functional, independent life. And so it really begs the question of what are the laws? What kind of reality are these laws creating? Because they are not actually thinking through the implications of anything. I'll harken back to when even I actually first started doing this work about 4 years ago in Georgia. I had the opportunity to just casually chat with a Republican congressman off the record. And it's been long enough now that I can share this story. But I asked him, I was like, when you proposed, you as in the state of Georgia proposed that a fetus should be deemed a person. And the concept of personhood is like a very intense, complicated legal process.
Right.
So I was like, so when you and your colleagues decided to assign fetal personhood, did you consider that now, you know, a non-American woman who's pregnant could enter the United States and she would have an American citizen growing within her per your own rules, and therefore she could not be detained or deported and things like that. And unfortunately, I had to use such a heinous example because I'm speaking to the heinous people, right?
Right.
And I kid you not, Robin, He was like, "Well, we never actually thought it through. We were just like, yeah, this sounds like a great thing to do, and we're gonna propose it because honestly, there's no chance it's gonna pass." And I was like, "Excuse me? We
Oh
need
my
women
God.
running the world like yesterday." So there we are. There we are.
I don't even know how to respond to that.
There's no good way to respond to that. It's insanity.
Oh
They're
my.
not thinking through the implications of the laws they're passing. And sometimes they don't even know. I was thinking of so many examples, and I was like, we're talking about depravity, and like, I don't want to make this so much worse. But if you recall when the Alabama Supreme Court kind of overturned the right to accessing IVF and said that it wasn't like couldn't be available in the state anymore, they interviewed different congressional members in other southern states to kind of like get their opinions on what they thought about what happened. And somebody went and talked to Tommy Tuberville out of Tennessee and was like, "Oh, what do you think? What do you think about that?" He's like, "Oh, it's great. This is great. This is so great." And they were like, "Excuse me, do you not support IVF?" And he's like, "Oh, I didn't read the decision. I didn't know what it was about." Like, they are not thinking before they speak. They're not reading the bills that they're passing. They're not doing any of the analytical work that actually determines what the implications of these legal decisions are on the people in their own states, to their own constituents. It's crazy.
Yeah. And we've had, Pari, to your point, when healthcare providers are forced to consider legal consequences alongside their medical decisions, women are dying all across this country as a result of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the mass media does not really portray that part of what's happening. So we refer to it as the chilling effect when providers like aren't sure. They freeze because they aren't sure, like they have a patient in front of them who desperately needs care, especially if it's an emergency situation. But they don't want to put their entire medical license on the line, which a lot of people in our comments really come down on providers for. And we do not support that for the most part, because you don't go into medicine to become a martyr for the
Right.
field. You go in because you want to help people, you want to save people, you want to provide the best quality care possible. And providers are put in this impossible position where they're forced to make a decision around, do I provide the treatment that I know this patient standing right in front of me needs and risk losing my medical license forever, my entire career that I've spent a decade in school and training for? Or do I just wait and hope that it gets better until the last possible second? Because there's been like some of the bans are so vague that these providers have to determine like which organs women are allowed to lose before it's considered an emergency circumstance, which is a crazy thing to have to reason through when you're like a highly educated
Right.
anybody, but especially a medical provider who
Yeah.
went into this to do no harm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to really place the blame where it needs to go, the decisions about which organs women should be losing is a direct result of Idaho suing the Biden administration for EMTALA, which is that emergency treatment law I mentioned earlier. And without getting to the specifics of the law, basically EMTALA is the law that federally says that if someone shows up to an ER and they require life-saving treatment, and that life-saving treatment happens to be an abortion, they are obligated to receive it, right? And Idaho sued because they don't want to provide that care to women, which is just psychotic behavior, in my opinion. And then SCOTUS debated that case, and the debate of that SCOTUS was doing was, well, what if a woman's liver fails? Then should we treat her? No. What if a woman's gallbladder fails? Then should we treat her? No. Like, it was truly like they were literally dissecting women into just specific organs. And this is why I'm saying, like, they really think of us
Wow.
as incubators, you know? So it lends further and further credence to that ecosystem I mentioned earlier, is that they're truly trying to wage a war against anyone with a uterus. And they are doing that because they want to maintain their power structures, right? And their financial structures as well, because they know that women are a powerful force to be reckoned with if we are actually allowed to have our autonomy and make our own decisions.
Yeah. Have you heard in the DMs or from women that you interact with that they are delaying care because they're afraid, confused, or unsure about what their rights are in the given state that they're in?
Yeah, I mean, we get anecdotes about that all the time. They're quite painful to read through. We're not medical providers, so we can't help them with advice except for like
Right,
what resources to go to online. But ever since Roe was overturned, there's been a lot of intentional confusion around the laws that are being passed
mhm,
over what type of care people can access, where they can get it, and how.
right,
And so part of our education that we provide on our platform is making sure people know about telehealth resources, Plan C pills, CareFM, IneedAnA.com, all of these resources where you can still go to get care nationwide, or at least to get to somebody who knows how to access care. But part of the reason why you see the examples that Pari gave about women getting so ill in their pregnancies that they reach emergency care is because they delayed it in the first place because of the
right.
maternal health deserts that I started off speaking about at the beginning of our discussion. There's no one around for them to go to. These abortion bans have meant longer travel times. Women have to take time off work. We hear all of these anecdotes in our comment sections and our DMs about all of the hurdles that they're forced to go through just to get seen by a provider. And they can't do all that for the amount of prenatal visits or just regular general healthcare visits that they need. So they just don't go until something really bad happens. And then they show up at the ER. And that's where a provider is put in a position about whether or not they can provide life saving care.
Yeah. For any parents that we have listening, especially those that are raising daughters, what should they understand about the world that their daughters are inheriting?
What a big question, Robin. I am raising a daughter. She's still new to my life. I say that because, I spent 37 years without her and now 1 year with her. And people are like, she's not a new baby anymore. I'm like, to you, she's not. To me,
Right.
she absolutely is. Um, I'm going to raise her to be as cantankerous as possible. Like just as fierce and as much of a rule breaker, which will, probably also piss me off at some points when I'm like, you should do this. And she's gonna be like, no. But that is my current approach is just like be very honest with your children about where we're at as a country. Teach your kids to be the type of people you want to see in the world. Like that is truly what I often talk about. And just teach them to be fighters. That's
Yeah.
that's going to be my approach.
Yeah. Eve, anything to add to that?
I feel like this sounds really cliche, but I think we need to teach them to still
Mm.
have hope. There's a lot of desperation right now in the state of women, but Pari and I would not continue to do this work online if we thought that we were past the point of no return.
Right.
And I think we have to teach that to younger generations in order to continue building like the activist networks that Pari and I have built for ourselves that we found in our friends and our family and our colleagues. And I think we need to like instill that on our children too, so that we have fighters coming up behind us. You like a multi-generational fight that this is.
Yeah. And as I said in the introduction, both of you are two of the most visible voices online around this issue. And as a result of that, you get intense criticism thrown at you,
Mhm.
threats on your life, a lot of vile things. What made you decide to get into this work in the first place? Where did that drive and that conviction come from?
I have a very specific moment, and I think Pari has like kind of a longer view moment. So
Yeah.
I'll share that I spent a few years living overseas and I was asked to be a teacher. I was supposed to be an English teacher, but I actually became a health teacher because that's what the community needed at the time. There was no like registered health teacher in the village that I was in. And I had I was shocked to learn that the full grown women who came to my health classes didn't understand how their own reproductive systems worked. And what I mean by that is I was teaching like an aerobics class at some point. So it was like health, gym, all the things. And one girl didn't show up to class, and I asked her friends, "Where is she?" And she said, "Oh, she's sick." I said, "Oh, okay. What kind of sick? Does she have a stomach virus? Does she have a cold?" no, she's bleeding. Like, you know how you get sick every month. And I was like, huh, okay.
Wow.
These girls are taught that when you have your period, when you menstruate every month, that you are sick. And that's something that girls have to deal with and boys don't have to deal with. And I talked to this girl's parent, and she was like, yeah, we don't let them leave the house when they're sick every month. Sometimes they don't go to school. And this community mostly used pads. They didn't use tampons. So it was like a little bit harder for them to figure out how to manage their flow for a week every month. And I realized that they are told from an early age that they are just sick. And they are not
Wow.
explained that it's part of nature, it's part of how you become pregnant. They didn't know how pregnancy worked. And it made me realize how much I took for granted sex ed in the US,
Yeah.
and that not everyone is afforded that education. And that made me want to spread that education, not just about comprehensive sexual health education, but biology, reproductive health. I wanted to spread it as far as I could. And that was kind of the beginning of my reproductive health career.
Pari, how about you?
Yeah, I actually feel like it was just I was born this way. Maybe I don't know. I was like, w- I grew up in the most religious country in the world, and at the age of 9, I was like actively rebelling against everything that was happening because the religion unfortunately came with like deep inequity. And my younger brother was allowed to do things that I wasn't allowed to do simply because of the context, not because of my parents, but because of the environment in which we lived. And I think that planted a seed for just like rebellion and rage, whatever that manifests as. And, you know, I have not yet in my life needed to access an abortion, but I think that either my upbringing or whatever it is that was instilled in me has made empathy such a huge part of who I am that I'm like, this is something that I'm going to fight for the rest of my life, even if I don't need it, because I think it should exist for every single person.
Right.
And that has just been enough of a driving force. Like, you started this question by asking us about the tremendous amount of hate and stuff that we get online. I have to say that, you know, kudos to Eve and I, like, we don't actually let that really get to us too much. We are happy to take criticism on like legitimate things that, people might be upset about. Like either we had an opinion that they didn't agree with or whatever it is. But most of the time, it's just misogynistic, vile crap that people are used to saying to women,
Right.
especially from the anonymity of a screen or a phone. So that has never dissuaded me. And in fact, actually, I think it fuels me sometimes because I'm like, if we're making these people angry, then we're clearly doing the right things in
Right.
an environment where people are trying to silence women, right? So I stay driven because of our haters, basically.
They really do fuel her. I can verify that.
What have you both learned about courage that you didn't know before you started doing this work?
I think it can come in many different forms.
Mm.
So I will say Pari has always been the more resilient one in our dynamic around the haters. It was really hard for me when we first started. And Pari would be like, why do you care about those idiots? And so to me, like courage has taken multiple forms, but part of it is not feeling like I'm eating shit from these losers online all the time and
Right.
really like coming into my own of like what I'm saying is right. People need to hear it. And I don't give a flip like what all of these psycho men say that are living in a basement somewhere.
Right.
I also think it means like showing up in spaces that don't always make sense to like the niche that you're in. So Pari and I started our account really focused on just abortion rights because it was based on the fall of Roe. But since then, we've started getting invited into spaces that are just about democracy or about like food security or other places that really don't have like what folks would see as a direct connection to repro. But part of our skill is being able to connect anything back to reproductive health
Right.
and having the courage to show up in places that aren't always the most obvious for
Hmm.
the cause that you're fighting for, I think is really important because at this point, everything that you can care about is intersectional with democracy.
Yep.
We're all fighting for democracy because without democracy, there isn't reproductive rights and there isn't a lot else. So I think the courage to show up in unexpected spaces too.
Yeah. What do people fundamentally misunderstand about advocates like yourself?
I really appreciate you asking this question because I think that, there's a number of advocates and content creators, right, online, and everyone has a different niche or a different voice that they're bringing to the table. And I think that oftentimes people mistake us as folks who are just like sitting in our homes and getting on a camera and saying, we think this, and then not actually doing anything about it. The people who have been following us from the beginning, they have a sense of the fact that we're both public health experts and epidemiologists and have been working on the ground and internationally for almost 16 years each now. But most of the time, people don't see that and they just see us as like, they call us like clout chasing or like we're doing it for the views and the followers. And the irony is that Eve and I are literally spending our own personal free time at the expense of, lives and hobbies and family interaction to put this messages out there because we believe in them so strongly. Like Eve has put her body in between like the cops and vulnerable populations in situations. I have been combing through every single publicly released file in the Epstein documents and publicly calling out very large, very powerful institutions. Like we are doing the work because we believe so deeply in this work and we're doing it in ways that reflects our belief in intersectionality. Like we're not just advocating for abortion access, we are also advocating for immigration protections and for labor equality and for the environmental protections and for AI regulation because everything is feeding into each other and nothing exists in a
Yeah.
vacuum. And we are doing all that within the confines of being just like two women in America who are subjected
Right.
to the same daily inequality that everybody else is and aren't paid for our work and have to deal with childcare and schedules and all of these other things. So I think that oftentimes what people miss out on seeing is that we are actually whole people and we are
Yeah.
bringing a tremendous amount of technical expertise into this fight. And we think that there is like value there, just like every other person is bringing their own perspective as well.
Yeah. Because women trust you with their stories, you get a window into experiences that most people never see. What truths are women carrying right now that the broader culture still isn't fully seeing?
I think one thing that's hit me hard, and I think Pari too, but I'll speak for myself, is that for a while we were doing a series called Blowouts and Bodily Autonomy. So we were trying to make an interesting way to be able to tell people's abortion stories. And I honestly thought that this series would bomb. I did not think it would do well. When we made the call to ask people for their stories, because we wanted to tell true stories of
Sure.
people in our audience, our DMs were inundated with stories from women who were like a blue dot in a sea of red or didn't even know they were a blue dot, but they had an abortion. And there is literally nobody in their community, nobody in their household that they felt like they could tell about it. And they wanted to be part of the solution. They wanted their story to be told. So they told it to us. And we
Oh,
would anonymize it by like me telling the story while I was doing something silly, like blowing out my hair, but it gave them the opportunity for their story to be heard. And I think, the takeaway from that for me was just how alone so many women still feel despite needing this type of care, despite it being so common, they still feel alone. And so
wow.
we're honored to tell that story through our DMs, but it pains me to hear those stories.
Yeah. Pari, anything you want to add to that?
That is actually the exact DM I also thought of when you asked the question. But I'll broaden it even past abortion stories. Okay. I think that there is not a single woman ever that I have met in my almost 40 years of life that has not been sexually assaulted or harassed in some way, form, or fashion. And the fact that it is just an accepted thing that this exists and
Right.
every woman on this planet is carrying at least one story and has a plethora of things that she does to keep herself safe, while the men on our planet are not acknowledging that in order for 1 in 4 women in this country to have been assaulted, that means that there's a rate of perpetration happening within the male population, right? I think that that is a weight that women are getting better at sharing with each other amongst women, but we are not sharing and carrying that weight as a society the way that we should be, the way that a self-actualized, fully equal society would, right? And when I think about the future that I envision for my daughter, sometimes I'm realistic and sometimes I'm just like, aim for everything. And in my aim for everything world, it is a world in which that statistic is down to zero, right?
Yeah.
And we are at a point where instead of us knowing with objective like proof that every one of these women has experienced something while all the men deny that it's happening, we're just at a point where sexual assault is like so outlandish, so unheard of, that if it does ever happen, the entire world stands up and pays attention, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Today in the US, 13 states have complete abortion bans in effect. 7 additional states have bans that take effect within the 6 to 12-week mark. And overall, 41 states out of the 50 have some form of abortion ban or gestational restriction. I am fortunate enough to live in New York, where the reality that I experience is very different from women living in Texas, Louisiana, Eve, you mentioned that, Alabama, Florida, or another restrictive state. Help our listeners understand those differences. What do you wish women living in states with broader protections understood about what women in restrictive states are navigating right now?
In 2025, 142,000 women left their home states to go to blue states to access abortion care. And what that means is that 142,000 women had to take time off work, had to potentially get childcare, had to get transportation or find somebody to drive them, had to subject themselves to the laws that exist even in the blue states where they had to be told about all of the things that their fetus is experiencing and so on and so on. And that is just a drop in the water of the people who are actually trying to access care, right? Like way more women than that couldn't actually get the care at all. And so ended up having unwanted pregnancies or going through some sort of healthcare emergency. I think that in addition to what Eve is going to say about like the differences, I just want to preface her response by saying that the states that are affording people care are carrying a huge burden. And that sometimes is actually not talked about in the science and the public health of it all, is that the states like New York, for example, governors like Kathy Hochul and governors like Wes Moore in Maryland, they are literally facilitating healthcare for women around the country because they have to, because that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
So I just, like Eve's going to share some more information now, but I think that that is important, first of all, to place is to say that not only are these the blue states like these havens for care, but they are actually also providing for people outside of those spaces.
Yeah. Eve?
I was just going to add like a broader perspective. And I
Yeah.
don't say this to scare people, but I think like going back to something Pari mentioned in the beginning, where we saw Roe coming years, or the overturn of Roe, the Dobbs decision coming years in advance, is that there are only a handful of states right now that have solidified abortion rights in their constitutions, in their state constitutions, even among blue states. So those rights don't stand if there's a national ban that's passed. And the states that have constitutionalized it at the state level will have to go to court over those protections. It's not an easy win. It's not foolproof. And so I just want to make the point that living in a blue state is not a permanent protection of your reproductive rights. Now, it's not a permanent protection if there's a national ban. And we would be remiss if we sat here and said, we're good in a blue state. Yeah, it sucks for women who have to travel here, but we're fine. That's not going to be true always. And I don't want people to be surprised the day that it becomes no longer true.
Yeah. And even in a blue state, I mean, our state has turned red
Mm-hmm.
and then back to blue.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if that were to happen now, it would be a very different situation for
Mm-hmm.
women.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I've said this a few times, but like everything is connected. We're seeing across the country that states are gerrymandering their electoral maps, right?
Right.
Some states to the point that they will never be able to be blue again, even though they were previously. And I think I hearken often back to what MLK said is that like an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And the truth of that when it comes to abortion is more real than anything because they have they, as in the Republicans, have very much written, admitted, said multiple times that their goal is to not allow a single future abortion in this country, right?
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then doesn't matter where you are, they are coming for you. And that
Yeah.
sounds like boogeyman-esque, but let's be real, the last 4 years have shown us that is in fact an appropriate description of what they are doing to women. So when we have to fight regardless of where we live, regardless of whether we ourselves have ever needed one, regardless of whether we have daughters who will need one, because it truly is about the power of the collective and us being able to stand up for each other. Because, like you said in the beginning, Robin, it's not just abortion, right? Abortion is just like barrier number one. They're coming
Yep.
for
Mhm.
everything.
Yeah. What does it look like when a woman truly trusts herself in a healthcare setting, especially when what she's being
Mhm.
told from her physician doesn't match what she knows to be true?
Mm. Eve, I think you should take this.
It's exhausting.
Your
I
IUD story.
Yeah, I can talk from personal experience. I'm on my third IUD. Yay. It's the best method for me and what I need. But I didn't know that there was, even in my position as a public health professional, I didn't know yet that there was different pain management techniques for getting an IUD.
Yeah.
And so I had gone through two of them where I was screaming so loud and like squeezing the hand of the nurse so hard that I was like crushing her bones. And it sounded like I was giving birth when in fact I was having an IUD inserted. That
Wow.
by the third time, I was like, this is not normal. And this is frankly unacceptable. I need to find somewhere that provides me the support that I need. I came to find out that a couple clinics in my area had started providing a paracervical block, which in doesn't sound much better. It's literally a shot to the cervix, but then it eases the pain for the actual insertion. And then other ones had started providing twilight sleep, just to kind of like make you a little less aware of like the pain.
Yeah.
I had to call around to 5 different clinics in order to find one that would provide me just the paracervical block. And it took a lot of time. It took a lot of research, but I knew for myself that that's what I needed. I also realized that not everyone can afford that time to do so.
Right.
I think to answer your question, to be a woman seeking the medical care that you know that you need is to be determined, it's to be unrelenting, and it's to be unapologetic about what you're asking for until you get what you deserve.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I live in a state that has a tremendous number of abortion restrictions. And when I got pregnant, I asked my OB, I'm like, if something happens and you're not allowed to help me, what do I do? And I feel like a lot of women in a state like that would be really scared to ask their OB that question because their OB can also technically, you know, report them.
Yep.
But I was, like, secure enough in my knowledge of the system and the laws and where I was at in my pregnancy to be able to ask that because I was like, "Nobody is going to be advocating for me like I'm going to be advocating for me," right?
Right.
And you can have the best OB in the world, and they're not going to care about you as much as you care about yourself, like, that's just a factual thing. So, I was, like, very clear from the beginning, and I'm like, I also frankly don't really want to have an OBGYN that is not willing to have these conversations with me because I don't feel like you would be the right physician for me if you're not looking for out for my best interest. So I very boldly walked into that room and asked all of the questions to an extent that I think she wasn't even expecting because I was like, "No, I need you to like actually vision this out with me. If scenario A happens, what is your role? If scenario B happens, what are you going to do for me?" That sort of thing. And I think there's that was easy for me to do just because I feel comfortable in the space, but I would encourage other women to also feel secure enough in their own research in the knowledge that they have collected about themselves to be able to ask these questions and to advocate more for themselves. And I say this especially as a woman of color because we see over and over and over again that women of color have the worst maternal mortality in this country. We have the worst maternal outcomes in this country. Our pain is neglected. Our concerns are neglected to a much greater extent than other patients. And so we have to become better at self advocating while also demanding a system where that's not the case at all.
Yeah. What do you hope today's daughters learn that many women in previous generations weren't even taught?
You got good questions, Robin. Pari?
I hope that the daughters of today and tomorrow are taught that they deserve everything the way that boys of today and yesterday have been taught that.
So, throughout this entire conversation, we've talked about restrictions, backlash, fear, challenges. What have you seen in women over the last few years that convinces you that we're not done yet? Where is that swell that you guys may have seen in the DMs or in comments that the rest of us don't see, that we really could use a little dash of hope right now?
I think still having some, albeit slim number of congressional members who are screaming their asses off
Yeah.
about things. And Pari and I are not the ones to like full weight behind Congress right now, but there are still a few. I think seeing people at the state level, like governors that are constitutionalizing abortion rights in their state. There's been movement on really small things like making it illegal to not give pelvic exams to women under anesthesia without their consent. I mean, there's been like very small medical and legal protections for women that you probably haven't even heard about,
Right.
that women's rights activists are moving behind the scenes. And it's incremental changes, but it's leading up to something a lot larger where activists and the general public of American women are like, we're not going to stand for this anymore, big or small.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Eve's being modest, but we did that. Like we were directly responsible for that pelvic exam rule being undone. So that gave us
Thank you for that.
mm, you're welcome. We have a lot more to fight, but it was also a good reminder for us that that movement can happen online, and social media is a very
Yeah.
powerful tool. Even though people love to discount it, there is a tremendous amount of change being generated because of social media. So that's one thing I would say. Women are running for office in higher numbers than ever before. There was more mobilization around the Epstein files from both Democrats and Republicans than any other issue in like in American electoral history, which is so powerful to think about
Right.
because that if we had not, and I say we as in like, if the Democratic Party had not gotten distracted by all of Trump's moves in Iran and so on, there was real social change happening at that level where like communities were banding together to demand that institutions and individuals be held accountable, right? And that is something that even I have committed ourselves to. We're going to keep doing that. But that was a moment where I was like, yes, there is actually much more interest in the general public in making life better than we're seeing in like the few people that are represented in our legal or media systems, right? So that's another thing. More women are organizing on the ground for their own communities than before. We've seen multiple successful activations happening across the southern United States to get people out to the polls, to get people informed about their own rights. Eve and I were involved a little bit in the Minneapolis response to ICE, which was led by several women, including their mayor, who's a woman of color. And there, I think I said this earlier, but women are really starting to understand that the reason why this administration is coming after us so hard is because they're scared of our power, which
Yeah.
means that we have power. Like they
Hmm.
wouldn't be trying to take away our right to vote if they weren't scared of what our votes could do, and they wouldn't be trying to take away our right to control our bodies if they weren't scared of what that control affords us. Like
Hmm.
we often hear Republicans say things like, "Oh my God, like women these days are getting divorced or like not married at higher rates than before." It's like, yeah, well, before we couldn't even have our own bank accounts, and now we can, which is why they're trying to target our bank accounts, right? So, I think the women of today are driven, ambitious, secure. They are trying to navigate a world that was not designed for them, but they're no longer scared. Like they're demanding what they
Right.
deserve. And it's been really like uplifting to see that, especially on the days where you're like, wow, we just got like 8 pieces of bad news at once. And you always fall back on the fact that you're a woman. And I'm like, actually, life's pretty great. Because imagine if I was born a man, you know,
Right.
you get what I'm saying. Like,
I do, totally. Yeah. Before we started recording, Eve and I were talking about the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN that we were at.
mm,
And one of the core themes at CSW this year was that human rights should not be a luxury. When you both look at reproductive healthcare through that lens, what does that mean to you?
I mean, to me, the core component is human rights is having control over your body as a human. So if
Yeah.
you don't have bodily autonomy, you don't have human rights. We know that they're interconnected, and we know that that informs like the full range of any equal rights that you would need to participate in society as a level playing field. So I it gets hard for me when I feel like people don't consider reproductive health like an innate human right, because that is literally the essence of human rights to me.
Right. Yeah.
yeah. To me, a future where human rights are not like shouldn't be a luxury is just a world in which like there's nothing controversial about abortion, you know? Like there's often a joke that happens within our spaces, even amongst like the men advocates who work amongst us, is like that if men could get pregnant, there would be like abortion vending machines on every corner. And after I like heard that for the first time, I was like, I actually pictured it with imagery and I was like, they're right, because human rights are only considered a luxury for certain groups of people. Like in our
Uh-huh.
entire world, right? It's always the powerful, it's always the wealthy, it's always the ones who are in a position to control other people that are also controlling people's human rights. But if we were in a situation where every human was, in fact, considered equal and had equal access, then we wouldn't really need to talk about this.
Yeah. Is there anything that you both want to share to close us out that we haven't touched on?
I think that a lot of people see activism as this big scary thing and don't necessarily know like how small you can start. And I mean that in two ways. The patriarchy, which controls like all of this controversy around abortion, starts at very young ages. Like when your daughter is told what uniform to wear to school and that it's different between boys and girls. You know who gets to decide that? The
Right.
PTA, the school board, not the president of the United States, not someone in Congress. So going to your PTA meetings is activism, or like going to your school board meetings is activism that in its own way will ladder up to the larger reproductive rights that we've talked about for the last hour. The other thing that I really want people to internalize is the importance of normalizing the conversation about reproductive health. Like what Pari was just saying, we want to live in a world where you can say, hey, I'm going to go get an abortion tomorrow. What I mean by that is like today, I had to go get an x-ray of my hips and the x-ray showed my IUD. And I was like, that's great. She's still there. She's in place, snug as a bug in a uterus rug. Like, this is awesome. And I sent the picture to a couple friends who were like, oh my God, look at your IUD. This is so great. Because in my circles, it is normal to do something like that.
Right.
And it surprises me because it's normal to show people your ultrasounds when you're pregnant. Why is it not normal to show other things in other circumstances or to have these conversations outside of pregnancy? We need to normalize the everyday conversations around reproductive health if we stand a chance at normalizing abortion, normalizing repro as a human right.
I want to simply say that at a time where we, like the one we're in, where, it feels like every day is a constant barrage of bad news and it's hard to sort of stay uplifted and positive. Community itself is resistance. Like, if you are able to find and maintain people around you that sustain you, that is a form of joy and resistance and is what
Mm.
makes you a stronger advocate and a fighter at the end of the day.
Love that. Where can our listeners connect with both of you online?
We are on Instagram and Facebook at women_in America. and on TikTok and Substack at Women in America.
And we will have links for all of that in the show notes. Pari, Eve, thank you so much. This is such an important conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you,
for
Robin.
having
This
us.
was great.
We'll see
Yeah.
y'all back here next week. Take care. If this conversation awakened something in you, pay attention to that. Audacity isn't reserved for a select few. It's a decision made in moments when conviction demands action. If this episode moved you, I invite you to follow the show and be part of amplifying women who are changing the world across cultures, continents, and systems of power. This is the Audacity Tapes. Until next time, choose courage.